my mom was most worried about what would happen in between leaving somewhere and getting home. Well, she was worried because it was true. That's when my brother Sonny died. He was leaving work one day, and a man walked up to him and shot him, so he never made it home. My older brother Sonny was 15 years older than me, and I was 3 when he died. And I have another brother, Michael, who's 2 years older than me, but his autism made me responsible in most cases. So that meant I wore the house key around my neck whenever we walked home from school. The house key was looped through a yellow yarn hair ribbon tied at the end so that I could wear it under my shirt. And the big rule was, as soon as we walked in the door, we had to call Mom and let her know we were home. And if she had time before going into work to make dinner, then it would be in the kitchen. If not, then 10-year-old me would be able to make an easy dinner for us and my dad. And while we were home, we weren't policed or anything. We had books and our video games and MTV. There was no limit on screen time. The only rule we had was you could not leave the house. So that's how I grew up. I grew up under this umbrella of grief and very traditional values. So by the time I was 16, I was desperate for any kind of freedom. I got my driver's license in exactly 2 weeks. And my mom, any chance she got, would say, they used to teach driver's ed in high school for a full semester. So by the time you were done, you had no worry that you could drive. Well, after my crash course driver's ed, my mom and dad would say prayers and cross themselves for a whole year when they rode with me. Either way, I was happy to do any errand they wanted in my first car, a 1987 Plymouth Caravelle. I'd say, yes, Mom, let's go to the H-E-B, I'll do that. Hey, Dad, I'll pick up dinner. Yes, Mike, we'll get that wrestling magazine. I still think it was the best $500 my parents ever spent. So my freedom grabs started small. I would tell my mom, I'm going to the public library, but maybe I felt like driving to the beach instead. If my best friend Sharon and I said we would go see a movie, we were probably just driving around. I mean, I did a lot of driving around. Gas was under $1. So when we did that, it was like discovering a whole new city. Sharon and I did and went wherever we wanted. One time we found this little coffee house in a nearby neighborhood and instantly declared it our hangout. And it felt like in those moments that I could get out from under that grief umbrella that we were living under at home. And I never pushed curfew, though, during the week. I waited for the weekend to do all my pushing for my 11 p.m. weekend curfew. And one time I made the mistake of forgetting something, ran home to grab it, and as soon as I got to the door, I heard my mom say, "It's almost 9. I don't think you need to go out." So in other words, you're done. Lesson learned, be sure to leave the house with everything you might need and have no reason to go back. So since it was like the mid-90s, so I needed blank notebooks, pens, books. Yes, I was that teen at the coffee house writing or taking up a booth at Denny's to write poetry and drink coffee and eat toast. So that meant that bag also had my favorite Dr. Pepper lip smacker, a brush, a shirt, a sweater, and my favorite ball chain choker. So there was no going back. When eventually Sharon had the home advantage, she got a job at McDonald's, and she convinced her older parents that she could stay home and work over the weekend so her parents could go to the ranch on their own. So that meant the freedom grabs got bigger. I just stayed over at Sharon's house. Now, my mom needed to have me call her house as soon as I got there. She wanted to see Sharon's number on the caller ID. And then after that, I was free. I had the whole night ahead of me. And eventually, Sharon became my, we covered for each other. We were each other's conspirator. So with all those weekends, we eventually got boyfriends. And her boyfriend was older and into cars, and my boyfriend was the moody guy from the coffee house. And he was from a rival high school and wore a black trench coat. And people called him Skunk because he shaved the sides of his head and left a black stripe of hair at the top. But I was the only one that could call him by his real name, Mark, because I was his girlfriend. And we wrote me letters in like the tiniest penmanship, and it had pictures of him crying with dead flowers around it because he missed me so much. I thought he was so sensitive. And, that just meant now that we had dates to homecoming. So 2 things had to happen before, to make that plan possible. And those plans are possible because they were easier than having the fights. Whenever my mom and I would argue about what I could and couldn't do, she would say in an intense whisper, "I know what it's like to lose a child," to drive home the point that there are things out there that didn't care what I wanted. And then I would feel ashamed because it felt like I was getting punished for Sonny dying. I barely knew him, and one of my 2 memories is his funeral, and that made me feel even more shame. So this had to be the way. The homecoming plan, or the parent plan, was Sharon was going to the dance with me and spending the night at my house, and I was going to the dance with her and spending the night at her house. And then the boyfriend plan was dinner at Whataburger, I know, the dance, and then hanging out in Sharon's boyfriend's house. So we also decided that she and I were going to wear black dresses with our black docs and paint our nails silver. And I thought, is this how adults must feel, getting ready for a night out and not have to look at your watch all night? She knew that I also had to call home before we could do anything, and she figured out that her cordless phone could still be in range if I made the call from the front of her house while I was parked out front. I was literally one, "Bye, Mom, love you," from having the best night ever. The reality, I was too nervous to eat my burger, so that ended up in the car. The dance was on the USS Lexington in Corpus Christi. Now, while the idea of having a dance on an aircraft carrier sounds cool, reality, it's a sweaty experience because none of the air from the water can go into the dance. So Sharon and I just made sure to get dance pics because, pics or it didn't happen, and we were out within the hour. Now, it was even more confusing at her boyfriend's house because Mark then just got awkward. He was quiet, said cryptic things, and then just started staring at me. So, was I supposed to know what he's thinking? Was the night really serious? I mean, I was just expecting a fun date and a charming date and fun conversation. And eventually, I just kind of yawned my way to a few hours of sleep. Now, the next day, I still had to get us home by 9 a.m. And what I didn't know was, not too long after I dropped off Sharon, she was in the kitchen hanging out with her mom, and the phone rang. She dove for it just in time to hear my mom on the other end asking about me. So she was just in time to say, "She's on her way home, Mrs. Maldonado. We just stopped for breakfast at Whataburger." And as soon as I walked in the door, bag in hand, she was hanging up the phone. She hung it up, looked over at me, and smiled because I'd made it home. Thank you.